Sarah Shepherd stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Challis, Idaho Territory, with her 4-year-old daughter Emily clinging to her skirts, and wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The year was 1877, and the frontier town looked even smaller than she had imagined. Just a handful of weathered buildings lining a single dirt road with the Salmon River glinting in the distance, and mountains rising up like silent sentries all around. She smoothed down her traveling dress, adjusted the bonnet that had gone askew during the rough journey, and tried to catch her breath as her eyes scanned the handful of people milling about the general store and saloon. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Emily whispered, tugging at Sarah's hand with her small fingers. "I know, sweetheart. We'll get you some water soon," Sarah murmured, her heart pounding as she searched for the man who was supposed to meet them here. Jackson Novak. She had only his letters and a single photograph, slightly faded, showing a tall man with serious eyes and dark hair. He was 32, a rancher who had written to her after she had placed her advertisement back in Boston, desperate and widowed and running out of options. The stagecoach driver hauled down her trunk and carpet bag, setting them in the dust with a thud. "Good luck to you, madam," he said, tipping his hat before climbing back up to his seat. Sarah's throat tightened. This was it. No turning back now. She had sold everything she owned, used the last of her savings for the train tickets west, and then the stagecoach north into Idaho Territory. Her husband had died 2 years ago in a factory accident, leaving her with nothing but debts and a daughter to raise. When the letters from Jackson Novak had arrived, each one more thoughtful than the last, she had allowed herself to hope. He had written about his ranch, about the wide open spaces, about loneliness that echoed through empty rooms. He had been honest about wanting a wife, someone to share the burden and the beauty of frontier life. She had been honest, too, telling him about Emily, about her circumstances, about her fears. "I don't mind that you have a child," he had written back. "A family is what I'm looking for. If you'll have me, we can build something good here together." Now, standing in the afternoon sun with dust settling on her shoes, Sarah wondered if he would take one look at them and change his mind. Emily was small for her age, with Sarah's blonde hair and her late husband's green eyes, and she had been so quiet during the journey, overwhelmed by all the newness. "Mrs. Shepherd." Sarah spun around at the deep voice and found herself face to face with Jackson Novak. He was taller than she had expected, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands that he held awkwardly at his sides. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and he wore clean clothes that looked like they might be his Sunday best. His eyes, the same serious brown from the photograph, searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Mr. Novak," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I'm Sarah Shepherd, and this is my daughter Emily." Jackson's gaze dropped to the little girl half hidden behind Sarah's skirts, and his expression softened in a way that made Sarah's chest loosen just a fraction. He knelt down slowly, getting to Emily's level, and offered her a gentle smile. "Hello there, Miss Emily. That's a mighty long journey you just made. I bet you're tired." Emily peeked out at him, her small face uncertain, but she nodded. "Well, I've got a wagon just over there," he said, pointing to where a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses waited in the shade. "And at home I've got a surprise for you. Do you like kittens?" Emily's eyes widened, and for the first time in days a small smile crossed her face. "Kittens, that's right. The barn cat just had a litter about 6 weeks ago, 4 little ones, all different colors. I thought maybe you might like to help me name them." "Can I, Mama?" Emily looked up at Sarah with such hope that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "We'll see, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, then met Jackson's gaze as he stood back up. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Novak." "Jackson, please," he said, and there was a warmth in his voice that eased something in Sarah's chest. "We're going to be married, after all. No need for formalities." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and started toward the wagon. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from here." "It's not much, but it's home. I hope you'll find it suitable." Sarah gathered her carpetbag and took Emily's hand, following him to the wagon. "I'm sure it will be fine. We're grateful for the opportunity, truly." Jackson secured the trunk in the back and then turned to help them up onto the seat. His hands were gentle as he lifted Emily first, settling her on the bench, and then he offered his hand to Sarah. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. This man was a stranger, and yet in a few days they would be married. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. As Jackson climbed up beside them and took the reins, Sarah allowed herself to really look at him. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with stubble. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, and his hands on the reins were competent and sure. He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they started forward at an easy pace. "How was your journey?" he asked after a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "Long," Sarah admitted, "but we managed. Emily was very brave." Jackson glanced down at the little girl between them. "I'm sure she was. Takes courage to come all this way to a new place." "It takes courage for you two," Sarah said quietly, "taking on a ready-made family." He was silent for a moment, and Sarah wondered if she had said the wrong thing. But then he spoke, his voice low and honest. "I've been alone on that ranch for 5 years, built it up from nothing, but it never felt like a home, just a place to work and sleep. When I wrote those letters, I wasn't sure anyone would answer. Then you wrote back, and I thought maybe I could have what I've been wanting, a real family." Something in his words touched Sarah deeply. This wasn't a man looking for a servant or a convenience. He was lonely, just as she was. Maybe they could help each other. The landscape opened up as they left Challis behind, rolling hills covered in sagebrush and wildflowers, with the mountains rising in the distance. The air was cleaner here than in Boston, sharper and filled with the scent of pine and earth. Emily's head began to droop against Sarah's side, exhausted from the journey. "She can sleep," Jackson said gently. "It's a safe road." Sarah wrapped her arm around her daughter and let her rest, and they rode in comfortable silence for a while. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, painting everything in gold and amber, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite her nerves. There was something steady about Jackson, something that made her feel like maybe everything would be all right. "There it is," Jackson said finally, and Sarah looked up to see a ranch house nestled in a valley with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. It was simple but well built, with a porch that wrapped around the front and mountains rising up behind it like a protective wall. Fences marked out pastures where cattle grazed, and she could see chickens scratching in the yard. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, and she meant it. After the cramped, grimy streets of Boston, this looked like paradise. Jackson's shoulders relaxed, as if he had been holding his breath. "I'm glad you think so. I know it's not fancy." "It's perfect," Sarah said firmly, and when he looked at her, she saw relief and something warmer in his eyes. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, then hopped down and came around to help them. Emily woke as Jackson lifted her down, blinking sleepily, and Sarah followed, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Come on inside," Jackson said. "I'll show you around and then I'll get your things." The house was clean and tidy, clearly the work of someone who had made an effort. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. Off to one side was a kitchen area with a good iron stove, and Sarah could see 2 doors that must lead to bedrooms. "I've been sleeping in the smaller room," Jackson said, gesturing to one door. "I thought you and Emily could have the larger one. There's a bed and a small cot I set up for her. If you need anything else, we can get it in town." Sarah felt her throat tighten again at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. That's very considerate." "I want you both to be comfortable," he said simply. "This is your home now." Emily tugged on Sarah's hand. "Mama, can we see the kittens now?" Jackson smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Let's get you both settled first. Then we'll go to the barn before it gets dark." He brought in their belongings, and Sarah took Emily into the bedroom to freshen up. The room was bigger than anywhere they had lived in Boston, with a real window that looked out over the valley. The bed was large and covered with a handmade quilt, and the small cot was set up in the corner with blankets folded neatly on top. There was even a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a dresser for their clothes. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Sarah asked Emily, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her face. "I like it," Emily said, her voice small but genuine. "Mr. Jackson is nice." "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed, hoping she was right to trust her instincts about this man. They washed the travel dust from their faces and hands, and Sarah changed Emily into a fresh dress before they emerged back into the main room. Jackson was at the stove, and the smell of coffee filled the air. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted, looking almost embarrassed. "But I can manage the basics. I thought we could have some bread and butter, maybe some cold chicken I prepared this morning. Tomorrow we can figure out a better arrangement." "I can cook," Sarah said quickly. "That's one thing I'm good at. If you'll show me where everything is, I can take care of meals." Relief crossed his face again. "That would be wonderful. I've been living on burned beans and tough beef for too long." They sat down to the simple meal, and Sarah found herself watching Jackson as he cut bread for Emily and poured milk for her without being asked. He was attentive in a quiet way, noticing what they needed before they had to ask. As they ate, he told them about the ranch, about the cattle he raised and the garden plot he had started but never quite managed to maintain. "I've got 20 head of cattle right now," he said, "hoping to build that up over the years. There's good grazing here and water from the creek that runs through the property. I do some work for other ranchers too, helping with roundups and such, to bring in extra money." "It sounds like you've built something good here," Sarah said, meaning it. "I've tried," he said, his eyes meeting hers, "but it's been lonely work. I'm hoping that changes now." After dinner, true to his word, Jackson took them out to the barn. The evening air was cool and sweet, and Emily skipped ahead, her earlier shyness forgotten in her excitement about the kittens. The barn was neat and well organized, with stalls for the horses and a loft filled with hay. In one corner, a tabby cat lay in a box with 4 tiny kittens tumbling over each other. Emily gasped with delight and dropped to her knees beside the box. "They're so little." "The mama cat's name is Molly," Jackson said, kneeling down beside Emily. "She's a good mouser. Keeps the barn free of pests. You can pet them gently if you like." Emily reached out with careful fingers and stroked one of the kittens, a tiny orange ball of fluff. Her face lit up with pure joy, and Sarah felt her heart squeeze. How long had it been since she had seen her daughter this happy? "What are their names?" Emily asked, looking up at Jackson with wide eyes. "They don't have any yet," he said. "I was hoping you might help me with that." Emily looked at the kittens seriously, considering each one. "That one can be Sunshine," she said, pointing to the orange kitten, "and that one is Patches." She pointed to a black and white one, "and that's Snowball and that's Tiger." "Those are perfect names," Jackson said solemnly. "I think they suit them just fine." Sarah watched the two of them together, this man and her daughter, and felt something shift in her chest. Maybe this would work. Maybe they really could become a family. As the sun set and shadows grew long across the valley, they walked back to the house together. Jackson lit the lamps, and Sarah helped Emily get ready for bed. The little girl was exhausted, and she fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow, one hand curled under her cheek. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her daughter sleep in this new place, and then she went back out to the main room. Jackson was sitting at the table, looking at some papers, but he looked up when she entered. "She's asleep." "Out like a light," Sarah said, managing a small smile. She hesitated, then sat down across from him. "Mr. Novak, Jackson, we should probably talk about the arrangements." He set the papers aside and gave her his full attention. "All right." Sarah folded her hands on the table, trying to find the right words. "I know we agreed to marry, but we barely know each other. I was thinking maybe we should take some time to get acquainted before we make it official." Jackson nodded slowly. "That's sensible. What did you have in mind?" "Maybe a few weeks, a month. Long enough to make sure we're making the right decision, for all of us." She met his eyes. "I don't want Emily to get attached if things aren't going to work out." "And what about you?" he asked quietly. "Do you worry about getting attached?" The question caught her off guard. "I suppose I do," she admitted. "I've been hurt before, lost people I loved. It makes you cautious." "I understand that," Jackson said. "I lost my parents when I was young, and I've been on my own most of my life. It's hard to trust that good things will last." He leaned forward slightly. "But I meant what I wrote in my letters. I want this to work. I want a family, a real partnership. I'm willing to wait as long as you need to feel sure." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "There's a minister in Challis," Jackson continued. "Reverend Patterson. He's a good man. When you're ready, we can go to him and make it official. Until then, you and Emily have a home here no matter what. I won't turn you out." "You're a good man, Jackson Novak," Sarah said softly. He ducked his head, looking almost embarrassed. "I just want to do right by you both." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Jackson stood. "I should let you get some rest. It's been a long day. I'll be up early to tend the animals, but you sleep as long as you need. We'll figure out a routine as we go." "Good night, Jackson." "Good night, Sarah." He went to his small room and closed the door, and Sarah sat for a moment longer in the lamplight, thinking about the turn her life had taken. Then she went to the bedroom, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed beside Emily. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, brighter than she had ever seen them in the city. She fell asleep to the sound of crickets and the rustle of wind through the grass. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of chickens clucking outside. Emily was still asleep, and Sarah slipped out of bed quietly, dressed quickly, and went to the main room. Jackson was already gone, but he had left the stove banked with coals and a pot of coffee warming. Sarah smiled to herself and set about making breakfast. She found eggs in a basket on the counter and flour and other supplies in the pantry. By the time Jackson came back from the barn, she had biscuits in the oven and eggs frying in a skillet, and the smell filled the house. "Good morning," he said, stopping in the doorway and staring at the scene before him as if he could not quite believe it. "Good morning," Sarah said, wiping her hands on the apron she had found hanging on a peg. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I would get started on breakfast. Mind, this is the best thing I've come home to in years." He washed his hands at the basin and sat down at the table. "You didn't have to do this." "I want to," Sarah said honestly. "You've been so kind to us. This is the least I can do." Emily wandered out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes, and climbed into Jackson's lap without a second thought, as if she had known him forever. Jackson looked startled but pleased, and he settled her comfortably. "Did you sleep well, little one?" "Yes," Emily said. "Can we visit the kittens again today?" After breakfast, he promised. They ate together, and Sarah was pleased to see Jackson's appreciation for the simple meal. He complimented the biscuits 3 times and finished every bite on his plate. After breakfast, while Emily played outside under Sarah's watchful eye, Jackson showed Sarah around the rest of the property. He pointed out the hen house, the root cellar, the smokehouse, and the garden plot that needed attention. "I've been meaning to get vegetables planted, but I'm better with cattle than I am with plants," he admitted. "I can handle the garden," Sarah said, already mentally planning what she could plant this late in the season. "My mother taught me. We always had a good garden growing up." "That would be wonderful," Jackson said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "I'll turn the soil for you today if you want to get started." They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Sarah took over the cooking and the garden, and she started organizing the house, adding small touches that made it feel more like a home. She found wildflowers and put them in jars on the table. She washed the curtains and hung them back up, letting light and air flow through the rooms. Jackson worked the ranch, but he always made time to spend with Emily, teaching her about the animals and letting her help with small tasks like collecting eggs or feeding the chickens. In the evenings, they would sit together after Emily went to bed, talking quietly by lamplight. Jackson told her about his childhood in Missouri, how his parents had died of fever when he was 16, how he had worked his way west, doing odd jobs until he had saved enough to buy this land. Sarah told him about Boston, about her late husband who had been a good man but whose family had abandoned her after his death, leaving her alone with a child and debts she could not pay. "I'm sorry you went through that," Jackson said one night, his voice rough with emotion. "You deserve better." "I'm here now," Sarah said. "That's what matters. You don't regret coming." She looked around the cozy room, thought about the garden she was planting, about Emily's laughter as she played with the kittens, about the steady, kind man sitting across from her. "No, I don't regret it." Something passed between them then, a current of understanding and growing affection. Jackson reached across the table and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. "I'm glad you're here, Sarah, both of you. The house feels alive again." Sarah's heart beat faster and she squeezed his hand. "I'm glad we came." 2 weeks passed, then 3. Sarah found herself watching for Jackson when he came in from the fields, feeling a flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her. She noticed small things about him. The way he was gentle with the animals, the way he always washed up before dinner without being asked, the way he listened when she talked, really listened as if her words mattered. And the way he was with Emily made her heart swell. He never treated her daughter as an inconvenience or an afterthought. He included her in everything, teaching her to whistle, showing her how to braid a rope, reading her stories from the one book he owned, a worn copy of fairy tales. One afternoon, Sarah was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard Emily shriek. Her heart jumped into her throat, and she ran toward the barn where Emily had been playing. But when she got there, she found Emily and Jackson both laughing, covered in hay that had fallen from the loft. "Sorry," Jackson said, grinning sheepishly as he pulled hay out of his hair. "We were building a fort up in the loft, and I might have knocked over a bale." Emily was giggling uncontrollably, picking hay off her dress. Sarah felt her fear drain away, replaced by warmth at the sight of them together. "You two are a mess," she said, but she was smiling. "Come up and see our fort, Mama," Emily called. Sarah climbed the ladder to the loft and found an elaborate structure of hay bales that Jackson had clearly spent considerable time building. It had walls and a roof and even a little window. "This is impressive," she said. "Every good fort needs to be sturdy," Jackson said seriously, but his eyes were twinkling. Emily helped with the design. "It's true, Mama. I told him where the window should go." They spent the afternoon playing in the fort, the three of them, and Sarah could not remember the last time she had felt this light, this happy. When they finally climbed down and headed back to the house for dinner, Emily ran ahead, and Jackson fell into step beside Sarah. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "For what? For being so good to her, to both of us. You didn't have to be, but you are." Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. When I asked you to come here, I wasn't just looking for help around the ranch or someone to cook my meals. I was looking for a family. And that's what you and Emily are becoming to me. I care about you both." Sarah's breath caught. "I care about you too," she admitted. "More than I expected to." He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I'd like to court you properly, if that's all right. I know we're planning to marry, but I want to do this right. I want you to know you're cherished." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, good tears this time. "I'd like that very much." That evening, after Emily was asleep, Jackson asked Sarah to walk with him. They strolled out past the barn to a small rise that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple, and the air was soft and warm. "I love this view," Jackson said. "It's why I chose this spot for the house. I wanted to be able to see all this beauty." "It is beautiful," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe I'm here, that this is real." Jackson took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "It's real, Sarah, and I want you to know that I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling when I read your first letter, I don't know. But being with you these past weeks, seeing you make this place into a home, watching you with Emily, it's everything I ever hoped for." Sarah turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Jackson, I'm falling in love with you too. I didn't think I could feel this way again, not after losing my husband. But you've shown me such kindness, such steadiness. I feel safe with you. Emily feels safe with you, and that means everything to me." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her softly, gently, as if she were something precious. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into him, her hands resting on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as fast as hers. The kiss deepened, becoming warmer, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "Marry me," Jackson said. "Not because of some arrangement we made through letters, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you." "Yes," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and when he set her down, he kissed her again. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that night Sarah fell asleep feeling like the luckiest woman alive. The next day, they rode into Challis together, the three of them in the wagon, to see Reverend Patterson. The minister was a kindly older man with white hair and a warm smile, and he was delighted to hear that they wanted to marry. "I can perform the ceremony this Sunday after services, if that suits you," he said. "That way the whole town can celebrate with you." Sarah and Jackson agreed, and the word spread quickly through the small community. Several women approached Sarah at the general store, welcoming her and offering advice and friendship. It was a far cry from the cold reception she had feared, and Sarah felt herself relaxing, feeling like maybe she was finally home. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Sarah wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she had carefully pressed, and she pinned her hair up with the silver combs that had been her mother's. Emily wore a new dress that Jackson had surprised her with, white with tiny flowers embroidered on the collar, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers they had picked that morning. The church was small but filled with people, and Sarah felt nervous as she walked down the aisle with Emily at her side. But then she saw Jackson standing at the front, looking handsome in a dark suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love and certainty that her nervousness melted away. Reverend Patterson led them through the vows, and when it came time for Jackson to say, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. Sarah's voice trembled slightly, but she meant every word with all her heart. Jackson slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him with the ring she had purchased with the last of her savings. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Patterson said with a broad smile. "You may kiss your bride." Jackson kissed her sweetly, mindful of their audience, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. Emily hugged both of them, and several of the townswomen wiped tears from their eyes. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the church with cake and lemonade. People came up to congratulate them and welcome Sarah to Challis, and she felt overwhelmed by the warmth and generosity of these frontier folk. As they drove home in the wagon that afternoon, Emily asleep between them, Jackson took Sarah's hand. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Novak?" Sarah smiled at the sound of her new name. "Happy. Really, truly happy." "Good," he said, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." That night, after they had tucked Emily into bed together, Jackson led Sarah to his room, which was now their room. He had moved Emily's cot to the smaller bedroom and given it fresh bedding and curtains, making it special for her. The larger bedroom had been transformed with wildflowers in vases and clean linens on the bed. "I wanted it to be nice," Jackson said, suddenly shy. Sarah took his hands and looked up at him. "It's perfect. You're perfect." He kissed her then, deeply and tenderly, and they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with patience and love. Jackson was gentle and attentive, making sure Sarah felt cherished and desired, and when they finally lay tangled together in the afterglow, Sarah rested her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat, feeling more content than she ever had in her life. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he murmured into her hair. "You and Emily, you're my whole world now." The summer passed in a blur of happiness. Sarah tended her garden and watched it flourish, providing fresh vegetables for their table. She learned to milk the cow Jackson bought for them, and she perfected her bread recipe until Jackson declared it the best he had ever tasted. Emily thrived in the open air and sunshine, growing stronger and more confident every day. She followed Jackson around like a shadow, learning everything he would teach her, and he treated her with the same love and patience he showed Sarah. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, Jackson with his arm around Sarah and Emily playing at their feet. They would talk about their days, make plans for the future, and sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, content to be together. One evening in late August, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. Her heart began to race, and she placed a hand on her still flat stomach, wondering if it could be true. She waited another week to be sure, and then she told Jackson. They were out checking the fence line together, Emily staying home to nap when Sarah found the courage to speak. "Jackson, I have something to tell you." He stopped walking and turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right," she said, taking his hands. "I'm with our child." For a moment, Jackson just stared at her, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We're going to have a baby," he said, setting her down gently. "Sarah, you've made me the happiest man alive." "You're not upset. I know we haven't been married very long." "Upset? This is wonderful. Emily will be a big sister. We'll be a family of 4. He placed his hand on her stomach, his eyes shining with emotion. Thank you for giving me this gift." Sarah felt tears stream down her face, happy tears. "I love you so much. I love you too, both of you, all of you." He kissed her tenderly. They told Emily that night at dinner, explaining that she was going to have a little brother or sister. Emily's eyes went wide with wonder. A real baby. "That will live with us." "That's right," Jackson said. "The baby will be here next spring. What do you think about that?" Emily considered this seriously. "Can I help take care of it?" "Of course you can," Sarah said. "You'll be the big sister. That's a very important job." Emily beamed with pride. And that night she chattered excitedly about all the things she would teach the baby, about how she would share her toys and read it stories. As fall arrived and the leaves began to change, Sarah's pregnancy became more visible. Jackson was constantly attentive, making sure she did not lift anything too heavy, bringing her extra pillows, rubbing her feet when they ached. The women from town came to visit, bringing baby clothes and advice, and Sarah felt embraced by this community in a way she had never experienced in Boston. One October afternoon, while Sarah was resting and Emily was at school, Jackson had insisted Emily start attending the small schoolhouse in town, riding in with him when he went to do business. A rider came galloping up to the ranch. Sarah went to the door, concerned, and found a young man she recognized from town. "Mrs. Novak, is your husband here?" "He's out with the cattle. What's wrong?" "There's been an accident. The bridge over Squaw Creek washed out in last night's rain, and the Thompson family's wagon went into the water. Mr. Thompson is hurt bad, and they need all the help they can get to pull the wagon out and get them to safety." Sarah's heart clenched. The Thompsons were a young couple with 2 small children who lived on a homestead about 5 miles east. "I'll get Jackson right away. You ride ahead and tell them help is coming." She hurried out to the pasture, grateful that Jackson was relatively close today, and called out to him. He rode over immediately, and when she explained the situation, his face grew serious. "I have to go help," he said. "Will you be all right here?" "Of course. Go quickly. They need you." He kissed her forehead and rode off at a gallop, and Sarah went back to the house, saying a prayer for the Thompson family. She tried to keep busy, but she could not help worrying. The creek could be dangerous when it was running high, and wagon accidents often meant serious injuries. Hours passed. Sarah made dinner and kept it warm, growing more anxious as the sun began to set. Finally, she heard hoofbeats and rushed to the door to find Jackson riding up, exhausted and muddy but safe. She ran to him as he dismounted. "Are you all right? What happened?" "Mr. Thompson broke his leg, but he'll live. We got them all to safety and pulled the wagon out. Doc Miller is with them now." He held her tight. "I'm sorry I worried you." "I'm just glad you're safe," Sarah said, breathing in the familiar scent of him despite the mud and creek water. They went inside, and Sarah heated water for him to wash while she told him about her day. After he had cleaned up and eaten, they sat by the fire, and Jackson pulled her close. "Days like this remind me how fragile life is," he said quietly. "How lucky I am to have you and Emily, to have this family. I don't ever want to take it for granted." "You don't," Sarah assured him. "You show us every day how much we mean to you." Winter came to Idaho Territory with fierce determination. Snow fell heavily, blanketing the valley in white, and temperatures dropped below freezing. Jackson worked tirelessly to keep the cattle fed and safe, often coming in half frozen at the end of the day. Sarah kept the house warm and cozy, and Emily loved playing in the snow, building snowmen with Jackson on his rare free afternoons. Christmas arrived, and they celebrated simply but joyfully. Jackson had carved a beautiful wooden doll for Emily, spending hours in the barn working on it in secret, and he had ordered a warm shawl for Sarah from the catalog. Sarah had knitted Jackson a thick scarf and mittens, and she had made Emily a new dress with matching hair ribbons. They read the Christmas story from Jackson's Bible and sang carols, and Sarah felt grateful beyond measure for this life they were building together. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Sarah's pregnancy advanced. She was large now, moving slowly, and Jackson hovered over her constantly, making sure she was comfortable. He had already prepared everything for the baby. A beautiful cradle he had built himself, tiny clothes the women in town had sewn, soft blankets Sarah had knitted during the long winter evenings. On a mild April morning, Sarah woke with the first pains. She touched Jackson's shoulder and he woke immediately, alert. "It's time," she said. He jumped out of bed and started pulling on his clothes. "I'll ride for the midwife and Doc Miller." "There's time," Sarah said calmly. "The pains are still far apart, but yes, you should go soon." Jackson rode into town at breakneck speed and returned with Mrs. Henderson, the town midwife, a capable woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in Challis. Doc Miller followed shortly after. Jackson wanted to stay with Sarah, but Mrs. Henderson shooed him out of the room. "This is women's work, Mr. Novak. You take care of Emily and let us take care of your wife." So Jackson paced the main room with Emily, who was frightened by all the commotion. He held her and explained that Mama was bringing the baby into the world, and it was hard work, but everything would be all right. Hours passed. Jackson could hear Sarah's cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her to help her, but he knew he had to trust the midwife and doctor. Emily fell asleep in his arms, and he held her close, waiting. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, the thin, strong cry of a newborn baby. His heart leaped, and he stood up, still holding Emily, and waited for what felt like an eternity until Mrs. Henderson opened the bedroom door with a smile on her face. "You can come in now, Mr. Novak. You have a son." Jackson's eyes filled with tears. A son. He gently woke Emily and carried her into the bedroom with him. Sarah was propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Jackson set Emily down on the edge of the bed and leaned over to kiss Sarah's sweaty forehead. "You're amazing," he whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," she said, smiling up at him. "Meet your son." She pulled back the blanket, and Jackson looked down at the tiny red face, the perfect little hands, the dark fuzz of hair on his head. Emotion overwhelmed him, and he gently touched one of those tiny hands, marveling when the baby's fingers wrapped around his larger one. "He's perfect," Jackson breathed. "You're perfect." Emily leaned over to look at her new brother. "He's so small," she whispered in awe. "You were this small once," Sarah said gently. "What do you think? Do you like being a big sister?" Emily nodded solemnly. "I'll take good care of him, Mama." "I know you will, sweetheart." They had already chosen a name if the baby was a boy, James, after Sarah's father, James Novak. Jackson held his son for the first time, and the baby quieted in his arms, and Jackson felt like his heart might burst from the love he felt. Over the next weeks, they settled into life with a newborn. Sarah recovered her strength, and Jackson helped with everything, changing diapers, walking James when he fussed, taking over household chores so Sarah could rest. Emily was a devoted big sister, always wanting to hold the baby, singing to him, bringing him her favorite toys. One evening, when James was about 2 months old, Jackson came in from the fields and found Sarah rocking the baby and singing softly while Emily played quietly at her feet. He stopped in the doorway and just watched them for a moment. This family that had seemed like an impossible dream just a year ago. Sarah looked up and smiled at him. "Come join us." He washed up and came to sit beside them, and Emily immediately climbed into his lap while Sarah leaned against his shoulder. They sat there together as the evening light faded, and Jackson thought about how his life had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked softly. "I'm thinking about the day you arrived in Challis," he said. "How nervous I was, how afraid you'd take one look at me and regret coming. How lonely this house was before you got here. And now," Sarah prompted, "now I wake up every day grateful. For you, for Emily, for James. You brought life to this place. You made it a home." Sarah kissed him softly. "You gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. You loved us when we needed it most. We're the grateful ones." "I think we're all pretty lucky," Jackson said, pulling them all closer. "We're not 3 anymore," Emily piped up. "We're 4 now." Jackson laughed. "That's right, sweetheart. We're 4 now. A real family." The seasons continued to turn. James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who laughed at everything and adored his big sister. Emily flourished in school and at home, secure in the love of her parents. Sarah's garden grew more abundant each year, and she started selling her surplus vegetables and preserves in town, bringing in extra income. Jackson's herd grew as well, and he began to make a real profit from the ranch. When James was 18 months old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Jackson was prepared, making sure she had everything she needed from the very start. Emily was excited to be a big sister again, and James was too young to understand but seemed to sense the excitement in the household. On a crisp October morning, Sarah gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose, for the wild roses that grew along the creek. She had Sarah's blonde hair and Jackson's brown eyes, and she was doted on from the moment she arrived by her entire family. "Now we're 5, Emily said proudly, holding her new baby sister carefully. "5 is a good number," Jackson agreed, his arm around Sarah as they watched their children together. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered, and Jackson was able to build an addition onto the house, giving the older children their own rooms and making space for the growing family. Emily grew into a smart, capable young woman who helped her mother and adored her younger siblings. James was adventurous and fearless, always following his father around and wanting to help with the ranch work. Rose was sweet and gentle, with a love for flowers and animals. When Emily turned 16, a young man from town began courting her with Jackson and Sarah's permission. His name was Daniel, and he was the son of the shopkeeper, a hard-working young man with good prospects. Jackson was protective of his eldest daughter, but he had to admit that Daniel treated her with respect and genuine affection. Sarah watched her daughter fall in love and felt the bittersweet passage of time. "She's growing up," she said to Jackson one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset like they had done countless times over the years. "She is," Jackson agreed. "But she's strong and smart, like her mother. She'll be fine." "I can't believe it's been almost 20 years since I stepped off that stagecoach," Sarah mused. 20 years since I took the biggest risk of my life." Jackson took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the familiar gesture they had shared for 2 decades. "Best decision you ever made." Sarah looked at him, at the gray that now threaded through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling and squinting into the sun, at the face she knew as well as her own. "The best decision I ever made," she confirmed. "You took us in, a widow and her child, and you made us a family. You gave us everything." "You gave me everything," Jackson corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to live, how to love. You, Emily, James, Rose, this whole life we've built together. It's more than I ever dreamed of." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the valley. In the house behind them, they could hear James and Rose laughing about something, and the sound of Emily humming as she read a letter from Daniel. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Sarah asked. "If I hadn't answered your advertisement, if I had been too afraid to come west." Jackson considered this. "Sometimes, and it makes me grateful every single day that you were brave enough to take that chance. That you trusted me with your heart and your daughter. You've never given me a reason to regret that trust," Sarah said. "Not once in all these years." "And I never will," Jackson promised, kissing her hand. Over the next few years, they celebrated many milestones. Emily married Daniel in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Challis, and Jackson walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. The young couple built a house in town, and within a year, Emily gave Sarah and Jackson their first grandchild, a baby girl named Sarah after her grandmother. James grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He worked alongside Jackson every day, learning everything about running cattle and managing the land. At 20, he married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a spirited young woman named Catherine, and they built a small house on the far end of the Novak property. Rose was the last to leave home, marrying at 19 to a kind young teacher who had come to Challis from the east. They moved to Boise, where he had accepted a position at a larger school, but they visited often, and Rose wrote long letters that Sarah treasured. When it was just the two of them again in the ranch house, Jackson and Sarah found themselves marveling at how life had turned out. The house that had once been so quiet and lonely now rang with the laughter of grandchildren who came to visit. The ranch that Jackson had built alone was now a thriving operation that he and James ran together. One spring evening, nearly 30 years after Sarah had first arrived in Challis, she and Jackson sat on the porch watching the sunset. Sarah's hair was silver now, and Jackson's was white, but they still held hands like young lovers. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Jackson asked. "The night you told me you were falling in love with me," Sarah said. "How could I forget? I meant every word I said that night, and I've meant it every day since." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "We've built a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Jackson agreed. "When I think about that lonely man who wrote those letters all those years ago, it seems like a different person. You changed everything for me, Sarah. You and Emily, coming here with nothing but hope and courage, you made me whole." "We made each other whole," Sarah corrected. "You gave us a home, a family, a future. You loved Emily as your own from the very first day. You've been the best husband, the best father, the best man I've ever known." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors paint the sky. In the distance, they could see the lights beginning to glow in James and Catherine's house, and they knew their son was putting his own children to bed, continuing the legacy they had started. "Now we are three," Jackson said softly, repeating the words he had said so long ago when Sarah and Emily had first arrived. "Now we are three," Sarah agreed, though they both knew that, in truth, they were so much more than three. They were parents and grandparents. They were the foundation of a family that had grown and flourished. They were two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. "I love you, Sarah Novak," Jackson said, the same words he had said countless times over the decades, and they still held the same weight, the same truth. "I love you, Jackson Novak," Sarah replied, and she kissed him as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates. They grew old together on that ranch in Idaho Territory, watching their grandchildren grow, welcoming great-grandchildren, always side by side. When they finally passed, within months of each other in their 80s, they left behind a legacy of love and family that touched everyone who knew them. Emily, who had been that frightened little girl on the stagecoach, stood at their graves with her own grandchildren around her, and remembered the day her mother had taken the bravest step of her life, bringing them west to an uncertain future. She remembered Jackson's kindness, his steady love, the way he had made them feel safe and wanted from the very first moment. "Now we are three," she whispered, repeating the words her stepfather had said so long ago, the words that had started their beautiful story. "Now we are three." But they had been so much more than three. They had been the beginning of something wonderful, the foundation of a family built on love and trust, and the courage to take a chance on happiness. And that legacy would continue for generations to come, all because a lonely rancher had written a letter, and a desperate widow had been brave enough to answer it. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, and the house that Jackson had built and Sarah had made into a home still stood strong, sheltering new families, new love stories, new beginnings. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the valley and painted the sky in colors too beautiful for words, you could almost feel the presence of that first family, the rancher and his mail-order bride, and the little girl who had brought them together, watching over the legacy they had created with nothing but love and hope and faith in each other.